So there's a huge learning curve in learning all of the 3 notes per string scale shapes going up and down the neck. And then not only that, getting fluent in them as well, so you can take a position and you don't just know it sort of as a scale, but you can just jump anywhere on the neck and be able to play it, or, you know, within a position, and be able to play the notes within the key in that position or on those strings. Yeah. Now there's a few different ways of doing this, and I've talked about a few of these in the past. You know, using a chord, if you like, as a slice across the neck is one really good way of doing it. The other way is to hang the 3 notes per string scales off on the pentatonic, for example, so you're taking advantage of other learnings that you've got as well. But this week, what I thought I'd do is show you how to do it based on the fragments of the scale that I've spoken about in previous videos. If you've checked out my deep dive into 3 notes per string video series, then you'll understand what I mean when I talk about these fragments. But if you haven't, I'll go into some detail in this video as well, just give you an overview of them. And then later on in the video, we'll start to take advantage of them to be able to just jump around the neck, to be able to find all of the positions. If you know the root note is there, for example, how do you know that that's where the 3 notes per string scale shape is on the upper strings? So that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so as I say, if you've seen my deep dive videos, then feel free to skip ahead. I'll put a link below, an index, so you can just jump to the later part of this video. But if you haven't ever seen those before, then there's something that most people aren't aware of. There's kind of a secret hidden in plain sight within the 3 notes per string scale shapes, and we can take advantage of that to do all kinds of things, to really sort of understand how to navigate the neck, understand what's going on under the neck. And that's what we're going to take advantage of this week. So what I've done actually is I've created a 1-sheet PDF, and I'll put a link to it in the description field below as well, so you can download it and have it for yourself as well. But what I thought I'd do to start with is just to go through that PDF and explain what I mean by fragments, explain what I mean by a secret hidden in plain sight in these scale shapes. So let's start there. Okay, so when I first started playing the 3 notes per string scale shapes, these are the shapes that I learnt, and hopefully you recognize them yourself. If you've never seen these before, you should be able to see that each one of these rows is a string, so that's the bottom E string, the lowest string to the highest string, and these are the frets going along as well. And the notes, the black dots represent where the root note is. So what I'd do is, if I want to play in G major, then I'd align that black dot with a G note, let's say on the 3rd fret of the low E string. And then you play 3, 5th fret, 7th fret, and then the next string up, 3, 5, 7, and then 4, 5, 7. And you can see there at 5, you've got another root note as well. So that's how these charts work. And learning this back in the day just took me ages, because I didn't know any other way of doing it. Now over time, I recognized that there's some repeated shapes, some shapes that keep occurring through these, and this is really what I want to draw your attention to. And the first one is this. Can you see just here, we've got a block of 9 notes across 3 strings, so three groups of 3, and they're all separated by a tone, yeah? And then if we look at this shape here, you can see the same block again, but this time it's between the 5th, the 4th, and the 3rd string, yeah? And you can see the root note is in the same place as well on both. And this shape just keeps popping up. And actually you can think of this shape, if you look here, there's only 2 strings, but if you imagine I had a 7-string guitar, I had an extra string down there, then that final string, that 7th string, would look just like this, okay? So it's kind of hanging off the edge of the guitar neck. You can think of it like that. Or you can look here, you can imagine that's the same shape again, but hanging off the top of the guitar neck. So if I had an extra string above the high E, then I could play my 9-note shape. Now, one of the things I also noticed was something screwy going on between the G and the B string. So you can see here, This is kind of that shape. Can you see? There's two strings where every note's separated by a tone, and then on the B string everything's shifted by a fret. Yeah, so the shape's a bit skewed just there. And the reason for that is because of how we tune the guitar. If you remember, when you tune a guitar, you tune all of the strings based on the 5th fret, apart from the G to the B string, which you tune based on the 4th fret. And that change in the tuning, that difference in the tuning between the G and the B string, is what causes this kink in the shape. Yeah? And you can see, if I look up here, here's that same shape again with the kink. And you can see it's going between the G and the B string again, and then everything lines up on the E string. So there's some consistency there. And this shape I called fragment 1. And I noticed that there were another 2 fragments as well. So fragment 2, you can see them here. So fragment 2 looks like that, where it's a semitone and then a tone, and a semitone and a tone across 2 strings. Yeah. So that's a nice consistent shape. And if you look here, you can see the same shape again. Or if you look here between the G and the B string, you can see again, because of that tuning, everything's sheared by 1 fret, but it's still the same basic shape. Yeah. So you can see, or just here, you can see the same thing. So that's fragment 2. And then fragment 3 was this one, where you've got a tone and then a semitone. And again, this is sitting across 2 strings. Okay. And again, if you look around across the different shapes, you'll see this popping up all over the place as well. So you can see it just here, for example. There's the shape, or just here you can see that shape. So if I color code this, you can see these are the fragments that I'm talking about. So fragment 1 I've marked in yellow, fragment 2 I've put in red, fragment 3 I've put in green, and I've shown where the root notes are as well. Okay, so if I take these shapes and then map it on the shapes up here, we get this chart. Can you see? Where all of the blocks in yellow, you can see, is fragment 1, there's fragment 1 repeated. So hopefully that makes things really stand out. So fragment 1 is in yellow, fragment 2 is in red, fragment 3 is in green. Now the other thing this made clear to me when I did this was that these 3 fragments were all I needed to be able to describe every one of the 7 3 notes per string scale shapes. You can see there's nothing else. A dot's either yellow or red or green, or it's a root note. Yeah, it's made of one of those 3 shapes. So that's one thing to be aware of, that these 3 shapes are all you need to be able to describe all of these scale shapes. And the other thing is the ordering is important as well. It's a consistent ordering. So you can see fragment 1 as I'm ascending up. So this is from the low notes to high notes. It's going fragment 1 to fragment 2 to fragment 3. Yeah. And you can see here there's fragment 1 to fragment 2 and then a run out of strings. Or just here you can see fragment 1 to fragment 2 to fragment 3, and then it wraps. So back to fragment 1 again. So from 3 to 1 it wraps. And once you realize that there's that wrap going on as well, you can see there, for example, 3, 1, 2. Okay? Or 3, 1. So these 3 shapes are all you need to be able to describe each shape of the neck, and they're all used in a very consistent way across the strings. Now this is really useful, even if you're in the same situation as I was. You know, you just learnt these scale shapes, you learnt them by rote. This is a good way of learning the scale shapes, but even if you already know this, this actually opens up a whole series of insights that you can work out about these scale shapes. So for example, if you look at these scale shapes, you can see the numbers here represent the intervals. So the root note is in black, and the 2nd degree of the scale is the number 2, 3rd degree is number 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 5, 6, 7, and there's a root. So if you can remember that ordering, then suddenly you can see here, okay, that's root 3rd, 2nd, 3rd, that's the 5th and the 6th. Yeah, you can see root, 5, 6. Yeah, just by learning that, suddenly you're learning big chunks of the neck and what the note functions are. And that's really powerful as well. So all of this is the stuff that I've covered in the deep dive video, so I won't go into it any further. But it's worth following up on that because I talk about minor scales, I talk about melodic minor, the harmonic minor and how they're mapped across on this as well. And then I start to elaborate more on the kinds of things that you can do with this kind of knowledge as well. Okay, so irrespective of the method you use to learn the 3 notes per string scale shapes, you probably learnt them in a similar fashion. You probably started memorizing them in a similar fashion by, playing the scale shape up and down in each position and getting used to how the fingers feel, how the finger feels on the neck, yeah? Which is one good way of committing this to memory. There is a downside of this though, in that this kind of memorization, this kind of sequence memorization, really doesn't lend itself to being able to jump to any position in that sequence. You tend to have to work your way through the sequence in order to find a particular note or a particular element in the sequence. A great example of this actually is the alphabet. If I asked you what the 15th letter of the alphabet is, the chances are you wouldn't be able to tell me. And the chances are you'd be like me, because I don't know what the 15th letter is, and you'd have to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and work your way through the alphabet until you hit the 15th letter, and that's what it is. And that's an example of a sequence memory. Yeah, you've memorized the sequence, but you can only recall it in the sequence that you memorized it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take advantage of the fragments. It's still going to be kind of a sequence memory in that we know that the fragments go fragment 1, 2, 3, and then wrap round 1, 2, 3, as I've spoken about before. But each of these fragments covers a much larger area of the neck, which means you don't have to walk too far through the sequence in order to know where you are anywhere on the neck, anywhere within that sequence, because you've only got 3 elements in the sequence to remember. Yeah? And so that's the approach that we're going to take. Let me see if I can demonstrate it for you. Okay, so when you play 3 notes per string scales, there's going to be a root note. Root notes are either going to fall on your index finger, your first finger, it's going to fall on the middle note of the 3 notes, or it's going to fall on the 3rd note of the 3 notes. Yeah? So let's cover the case to start with where the root note falls on the first note of the 3 notes, so on my index finger normally. And if we start with the first position of the 3 notes per string scale shape, you can see it kind of opens up how these positions just sit on top of each other. So hopefully you can see there's a pair of strings coming from the first shape, pair of strings coming from that second fragment, pair of strings coming from that 3rd fragment, just by knowing that's a root. So I can jump in my head, I can mentally jump. Okay, if I want to play on the G or the D string, I pick the 2nd shape, just by knowing that that's a root. Or so hopefully you can see that I can jump around this shape really quite easily by knowing, structurally these are actually pairs of strings that have the same shape to them. Really quite easy. What about if a root note falls on the A string? Well, again, they're actually fitting in the same pairs of strings but built up from that A string. So I know from the A and the D, that's coming from the first shape. The G and the B comes from the 2nd, and the E comes from the 3rd shape, yeah? So by knowing that's a root, I can find my way around this scale shape really quite straightforwardly, and the same's true if it's a D string root. You can see it comes from the first shape, 2nd shape. Okay, and there's my root. So, and again here I don't even have to play. I can just jump. In my mental image, I know that's a root. I know that's coming from the second shape. Yeah. So it actually builds up really quite nicely into a sort of mental map that I can just jump around the neck. Okay. The other direction. What about descending? Let's start with the root note on the top E and have a look at that. Well, again, you can see the shape is really quite nicely laid out. So 2 strings from the first shape, then 2 strings from the third, and then 2 strings from the second. So again, I can bounce around wherever I want to on this shape just by understanding that structurally this is actually really quite straightforward. And again, just like before, it doesn't have to be the top E that's a root. I could use the B string as a root, and if I do that, then again from the B string it's 2 strings coming from that first shape, 2 strings from the second shape, and then the third shape just falls off the edge there. And I know there's my root. Okay, so it's really quite useful to understand how these shapes are built, and structurally inside them, these three fragments allow you to navigate, jump around the neck, jump between strings, make string hops between strings really quite quickly. Now you can do the same thing with the notes that fall where the root falls on the second note of the string or the third note of the string. The second note ascending is actually pretty much as easy as the first string. So imagine that's a root, then the shape where there's a root note on the second note of the group of 3 comes from that second fragment. And I know in this case there's going to be 2 strings coming from that second, 2 from the third, 2 from the first. So by knowing that's a root, I can use my mental image of these pairs of strings to navigate around the neck again. Yeah. Coming back the other way, if the root note, what's going on below? Well, it's a little bit more complicated this time, but you can see the first note comes from the second shape, just like we'd expect, and below the second shape is always the first shape. And there's 3 strings of that. But okay. But that's described 4 strings of the neck straight away, and then below that is a third. Yeah. Okay. All from knowing where the root note is. And you can do exactly the same thing again, and I'll leave this for you to work out. If the root note falls on the third finger, then it's the third fragment which carries that starting shape. And above the third is a first. Yeah. And the 3 strings are the first. Yeah. So really quite straightforward to work out. Okay, so that's it for this week. It's quite a lot of information this week. As I say, check the PDF out, download the PDF, and that has everything summarised in that. Also check out my deep dive series as well, because I cover not only the major scale, covered all the minor scales, the natural minor, the harmonic minor, the melodic minor, talk about how you memorise modes. I talk about how you can use this, as I alluded to earlier, to understand the note functions as well. So not only do you know the patterns themselves, I could ask you where is a third of the note with that root, and you jump straight there because you memorise the pattern, for example. So all of that's covered in the deep dive series, so go and check that out. Otherwise, we'll chat next time. Goodbye.